Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, it's to take a whole stack of really rich perspectives that came out of a recent international conference on Eritrean studies. We want to unpack the most compelling insights for you.
Yeah, we're looking at interviews with scholars, activists,
Yeah.
people who are right there. It gives us this unique window, doesn't it,
Mm.
into everything from ancient history being dug up, literally, to modern migration challenges.
Exactly. And even how communities are, actively trying to shape their own story, their public image.
It's a fascinating mix.
So think of this as your shortcut, your way into understanding some really key points and maybe some surprising links between these different parts of Eritrean history and its place in the world today, all seen through the eyes of the people doing the work.
And what strikes me is how these threads connect. You've got the deep past, the really tough present, and this conscious building of a future narrative. It's all intertwined.
That's a great point. It's not just isolated facts, it's a whole story. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's dive in. We're going to start by digging deep, and I mean literally digging deep into the earth. Our first source is an interview with Professor Sarena Masa. She's a leading archaeologist, and she talked about her groundbreaking work on the Adulis Project.
Right, Adulis. And this project, it's already challenging some long-held ideas about the region's history.
So tell us about the project itself. How did it even get started?
Well, what's really interesting, and Professor Massa highlighted this, is that it wasn't just, foreign researchers deciding to dig there. It actually started 12 years ago because the Eritrean government specifically requested it.
Oh, okay. So national initiative right from the start.
Exactly. That level of partnership is pretty significant in archaeology. Professor Moss is leading it now. She took over from her predecessor, the late Professor Alfredo Castiglione. They both have, well, decades of experience in African archaeology, which is absolutely crucial for a site like Adulis.
Right, that expertise matters. So what was the main goal? What were they hoping to find or maybe demonstrate?
The core vision is quite powerful, actually. It's about showing Africa's deep, deep connections to major world civilizations, not just as a recipient of influence, but as a core part of those ancient networks.
Okay.
And specifically for Adulis, the goal was really focused to highlight it as a key site, showing the archaeological roots, the origins of urban civilization in sub-Saharan Africa.
Sub-Saharan Africa, that's a key distinction, isn't it? Not just civilization generally, but specifically urbanism south of the Sahara.
Precisely. It's about using Adulis as tangible proof, archaeological proof, of those indigenous foundations of complex urban life in that specific region. It pushes back against narratives that might place those origins elsewhere.
And Professor Massa's findings,
hmm
they're really starting to, well, shake things up regarding the history of the Horn Africa.
Absolutely. The project is directly challenging the dominant narrative. For a long time, the thinking was that the Aksumite area, the capital Aksum further inland in Ethiopia, was the cradle of urban civilization in the Horn, the earliest, the most important.
Right, that's the standard story you often hear.
But Massa's findings, and this was central to her conference talk, they suggest something different, something requiring a pretty major rethink of the timeline. The evidence points towards Adulis rising to prominence, becoming a major urban and economic hub before Aksum really hit its peak.
Before Axum, wow, so Adulis wasn't just like the port for Axum, it might have been its own major center earlier on.
That's the implication. It suggests a more complex picture, maybe multiple centers developing, interacting, Adulis potentially being a precursor, or at least an early contemporary, not just serving a later Aksumite power.
That is a significant shift. And you mentioned this isn't just Professor Massa working alone.
Oh, definitely not. She emphasized the collaboration. It involves the Eritrean Commission of Culture and Sports. Dr. Segim Adin is actually the co-director alongside her, which shows that deep local partnership. And then you've got major international players like the Polytechnic University of Milan, other universities from Italy and elsewhere, plus, crucially, a large team of Eritrean and Italian researchers working together right there on site.
That mix of local and international expertise sounds vital. What about the work beyond just, digging? Is there other science involved?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Modern archaeology is way more than just excavation. They're doing crucial supporting work. There are environmental studies trying to understand the ancient landscape around Adulis, the geography, the ecology, how it changed.
Okay.
And critically, there are major conservation efforts. You find these amazing structures, these artifacts, you have to preserve them. That involves protecting the unearthed architecture, conserving the artifacts for study now and, for the future. It's geology, environmental science, conservation science, all feeding into it.
Right, it's the whole picture. Okay,
Yeah.
so we have the context, the vision, the team, the science. Let's get to the discoveries. What did they actually find that's leading to these big conclusions about Adulis's age and importance?
Professor Masa talked about their methods. It's a mix of traditional, careful excavation, layer by layer, and these non-destructive techniques. Things like surface surveys, geophysics like ground-penetrating radar, and she really emphasized the power of aerial surveys.
Aerial surveys, like with drones or planes, how does that work for archaeology?
Exactly like that. Using aerial photos, satellite images, drone mapping, you can see these subtle traces on the landscape, things you'd totally miss from the ground. Old wall lines, maybe street patterns, even slight color changes in the soil that hint at buried buildings.
Ah, okay. Seeing the invisible, almost.
Kinda, yeah. And she explained how these aerial surveys combined with the surface studies where they collect pottery fragments, things like that, just from walking the ground, were incredibly revealing about the sheer size of
The
Adulis.
size, so it was bigger than they thought.
Dramatically bigger. Shockingly so, actually. The old estimates, based on earlier work, put the main city area at maybe around 40 hectares, which is already pretty big for an ancient city.
Yeah, that sounds substantial.
But the new evidence, it pushes the known limits way out, especially to the west, right onto the bed of the Hadis River.
Wait, onto the riverbed, part of the city is where the river flows now.
Apparently so. Significant parts of it. That detail just completely expands your mental map of Adulis. It suggests a vast city spreading across land that's now underwater or fundamentally altered by the river.
Wow, that implies a much larger population, more complexity.
Yeah.
And what about the time frame? Does the size connect to how long it was occupied?
It does. Finding new buildings, materials, artifacts in these extended areas previously thought to be outside the main city or maybe too disturbed, it points to a much longer history for Adulis than was previously accepted. It pushes the timeline for major occupation back further.
Reinforcing that idea that it might predate Axum's peak.
Exactly. It adds weight to that argument. The physical extent suggests a longer period of growth and development.
And the artifacts themselves, what are they finding that tells the story of its history and its connections? You mentioned connections earlier.
Oh, the variety is incredible.
Mm.
Within this huge site, they're finding a really rich mix of materials. Professor Masa explained how these aren't just objects, they're clues. Different styles of pottery, glassware, coins found in different layers, the stratigraphy that helps them build the chronological sequence.
Okay, tracking changes over time.
Right. But maybe even more exciting is where this stuff comes from. The origins of these materials demonstrate just how connected Adulis was. We're talking about artifacts from all across the Mediterranean, Roman, Byzantine stuff, then clear links across the Persian Gulf, deep into the Indian Ocean trade networks, and also connections with Egypt.
So you're digging in Eritrea and finding Roman coins, maybe Indian pottery, Persian glass, all in one place.
Precisely. It's not just one or two stray finds. It's a consistent pattern showing Adulis was this major cosmopolitan hub, a critical node linking Africa, Europe, and Asia through these ancient trade routes. The sheer volume and diversity of foreign goods suggest it was way more than just a pit stop.
It paints an amazing picture, a truly globalized city thousands of years ago. And wasn't there one specific discovery Professor Masa mentioned that was particularly striking?
Yes, a really big one. The identification of what appears to be the earliest known church building in the entire Horn of Africa,
Yeah.
right there at Adulis.
The earliest church in the whole region.
That's what the evidence suggests. While the main boom period for Adulis is often put between the 3rd and 7th centuries AD, this church structure seems to date from the late 4th to early 5th centuries.
Late 300s, early 400s AD. That is incredibly early for a church building in that part of Africa.
It's profoundly significant, especially given the very ancient Christian traditions in Eritrea and Ethiopia. Finding tangible archaeological proof of a church structure that early provides physical evidence for the spread of Christianity right there on the coast. It predates many other known Christian sites in the wider area.
And it adds another layer to Adulis, right? Not just trade, but maybe an early religious center, too.
Exactly. It deepens our understanding of its role. And again, it reinforces that point about revising the chronology. Discoveries like this church, plus the site's vast size and other early materials, show Adulis' significance goes back further and was broader than just economics.
It's amazing how archaeology can just rewrite history like that. Shifting focus a bit, how does this ancient history connect with people today in Eritrea? Does the project engage with the local community?
That's a really important part of it, and Professor Masa stressed this. It's not just research happening in a vacuum. They work very closely with the Eritrean Commission of Culture and Sports and the regional administration in the northern Red Sea area. So local partnership at the official level. But what I thought was really great was the detail about engaging local schools. Students from nearby communities actually come to the Adulis site. They get briefings from the archaeologists about what's being found, why it's important. They see the history coming out of the ground near their homes.
That makes it so real for them, doesn't it? Not just dusty books, but tangible heritage right there.
It really does. And Professor Massa connected this directly to a theme at the conference, the role of national identity in nation building. She argued that the Adulis Project contributes by, well, scientifically documenting these deep historical and archaeological foundations of the nation.
Providing roots, essentially.
Exactly. Uncovering and validating this past, including Adulis's early prominence and its role as this hub of interaction, it gives a tangible link to a long, complex history. That can inform and strengthen modern national identity, providing a sense of continuity and historical depth.
She also made a point about Adulis having a unique character. Despite all these connections, Mediterranean, Arabia, India, she mentioned literature reviews showing it developed independently in significant ways. What does that really mean, independently?
That's a crucial nuance. It doesn't mean he was isolated, obviously. The trade goods prove it wasn't. But it suggests that while Adulis was definitely influenced by all this interaction, it wasn't just a passive receiver. It wasn't just a colony or mimicking foreign cultures.
Ah, okay.
It seems to have forged its own path, developed its own unique urban forms, its own ways of adapting to the local environment, its own systems, all while being deeply engaged in global trade. It speaks to the innovation and resilience of the people there.
And the trade wasn't just imports, right? They found evidence of exports, too, goods coming from the Eritrean hinterland.
Yes, absolutely. Professor Massa mentioned specific finds that show Adulis was the gateway for valuable goods coming from inland Africa. She gave examples like ivory, turtle shells, probably for decoration or trade in spices.
You can almost picture the caravans coming down to the coast.
Exactly. Loaded with these valuable goods, meeting the ships at the port, heading out across the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The archaeology makes that ancient trade tangible and shows the connection between the coast and the interior.
Looking forward, what are the plans for Adulis? It sounds like a huge site, maybe vulnerable given the location near the river and coast.
They have some ambitious goals. One major one is to establish an archaeological and natural park at Adulis.
A park? Why a park?
It's becoming more common for major sites, and Professor Moss explained it's really a necessity for Adulis, mainly to protect it from environmental threats, especially flooding. Given its location, partly on the riverbed, that's a serious ongoing risk. A park designation would help bring resources and legal protection for conservation.
Makes sense. And more digging planned, too.
Yes, they want to extend the excavations, especially exploring deeper layers, the deeper stratigraphy, in areas they haven't touched yet. That could give an even more comprehensive picture of how the site evolved over even longer time scales, maybe push the origins back further still.
And the challenges of actually working there. It sounds like a tough environment.
She mentioned the main one is just the climate. The heat is intense, severely limiting the months they can actually work effectively on site.
Right.
But they're planning ahead. They're looking at building a self-sufficient mission house powered by renewable energy to make long-term work more feasible.
A sustainable base camp. That sounds smart. And she mentioned agriculture. How does that fit in?
Yeah, that might sound a bit unusual, but it seems like a practical step towards the project's own sustainability. Having some local agricultural activity could help support the team, maybe involve the local community even more, and just create a more stable base for being there long-term in those challenging conditions.
Right, making the whole operation more resilient. Finally, her thoughts on the conference itself.
She seemed really impressed by the sheer range of studies presented. From the deep ancient past she studies right up to the very contemporary issues we're about to discuss. It highlighted the value of bringing all these different perspectives together.
Archaeology, history, modern studies.
Exactly. She expressed a hope for more frequent gatherings like this to keep sharing knowledge across disciplines and generations. It just enriches everyone's understanding when you see the connections.
Okay, so we've had this incredible journey back to Adulis, uncovering a potentially older, more independent urban history for sub-Saharan Africa, deeply connected to the world but forging its own path, roots for national identity. But as you said, the conference wasn't just about the past. It tackled some really tough contemporary issues facing Eritreans now, particularly around migration. So let's shift gears completely, from ancient ruins to the very difficult realities of the present day. Our next source is an interview with Daniel Sillas. His work focuses intensely on migration issues, and his own life experience really shapes his perspective.
Yeah, his background is quite relevant. Born and raised in Asmara, educated in Addis Ababa, and then he settled in Italy, which, as we know, has been a major destination for many Eritrean migrants. And it was in Italy that he got deeply involved in activism and research on migration.
So he's seen it from multiple angles, lived it in a way.
Exactly. That personal journey gives his work a particular kind of weight, maybe an urgency. He's not just an outside observer.
And his analysis isn't just about the humanitarian side, is it? He makes some pretty controversial claims. He talks about a system of exploitation, what he calls the migration business, using this idea of a reversed pyramid structure. Can you break that down for us?
Right. He uses this reverse pyramid model to analyze what he calls the migration crisis, or maybe more pointedly, the migration business.
Yeah.
He breaks the whole phenomenon down into 9 levels. It moves from the stuff we usually see and talk about down to what he argues are more hidden layers of involvement.
Okay, 9 levels. Who's on these levels?
Well, you'd expect human traffickers involved in the journey, obviously. But his pyramid also includes, at different levels, activists, journalists covering the story, politicians making policy, NGOs providing aid, even major international organizations like the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and Amnesty International.
Wait, so he's putting NGOs and organizations like UNHCR and Amnesty on this pyramid alongside traffickers. That sounds provocative.
It is extremely provocative. His structure implies that he sees players at almost every level of society, from grassroots activists to huge international bodies, as being part of this system. And his core argument is that some of these players, whether they intend to or not, directly or indirectly, might actually benefit from the continuation or the specific management of these migration flows.
Benefiting from the crisis itself.
That's his assertion. He's suggesting it's become a kind of business, an ecosystem with its own incentives, where vulnerability can be exploited not just by criminals, but perhaps woven into the fabric of the response itself. It's definitely not a simple good versus evil narrative he's presenting.
That's a really challenging perspective. Did he give any specific examples of how this exploitation might work, especially maybe after migrants reach a place like Italy? He mentioned Ifayat.
Yes, he used the Fiat example to make it concrete. He contrasted Fiat, the huge Italian car company that historically employed masses of Italian workers, as a pillar of the industrial economy,
Right, a household name.
with what he alleges happens now within the context of this migration business. He claims that companies, perhaps linked to big players or benefiting from the system, now employ migrants who are housed in camps or similar facilities across Italy, often paying them what he described as meager wages.
So he's framing it as a kind of modern exploitation of cheap, vulnerable labor, taking advantage of their situation once they've arrived.
That's exactly how he presents it. It's his example of a mechanism at the destination, not just during the journey, where economic entities might profit from the precarious situation of migrants. It's meant to show how this business isn't just about the transit, but can permeate the economic structures of the host countries themselves. It's a tough claim, implicating actors far beyond the smugglers.
Given how controversial these claims are, putting established organizations and companies into this frame, it's probably not surprising he's faced some pushback.
Definitely not surprising. He spoke about facing significant backlash and very direct attempts to suppress his work after his book came out. He described severe censorship and boycotting efforts aimed specifically at stopping the book's distribution and preventing his message from getting out.
People actively trying to block his work.
Yes, according to him, coming from various sectors that he believes felt threatened or exposed by his analysis. He felt these efforts were clearly intended to discredit his work, to silence his voice, despite him arguing it's based on extensive research and, crucially, his own firsthand experiences. He understands the journey, the systems, from the inside.
That must be incredibly difficult to face organized opposition like that.
It certainly is. It's something whistleblowers or critics of powerful systems often encounter. But for him, it seems this opposition didn't actually deter him. He said it did the opposite.
It reinforces commitment.
That's what he conveyed. He said facing that pushback just solidified his resolve to speak out. His motivation, as he put it, comes from a deep belief that it's vital to expose what he calls the hidden hands behind the migration business. He wants to shed light on the systemic issues he believes are perpetuating the crisis and allowing exploitation to happen. He's looking beyond individual bad actors to the structure itself.
And you can really see how his own journey, from Asmara through Addis Ababa to Italy, that experience of navigating those paths informs this resilience, this determination to advocate for a fuller, maybe more uncomfortable understanding of the whole picture.
Absolutely. It gives him that perspective, that drive to ensure that the stories aren't oversimplified or, as he argues, potentially exploited by the very systems claiming to help. It's a challenging viewpoint, no doubt, rooted in his experience and research, forcing you to question the straightforward narratives.
Okay, so while Daniel Sillas presents this critical, even alarming view of exploitation within the migration crisis, we also heard about very different efforts, people working incredibly hard to ensure that Eritrean voices are heard and their stories understood accurately, pushing back against negative narratives. This brings us neatly to our third source, an interview with Issayas Tesfamariam. He coordinates the National Public Diplomacy Group, the NPDG. He also has academic ties, teaching at Stanford and working at the Hoover Institute there. A different kind of perspective again.
Right, and he starts by making a really interesting point. Public diplomacy, this idea of shaping public perception, isn't new for Eritreans. He says it has a rich history, especially in the diaspora.
Rich history. How far back does he trace it?
Remarkably far back, especially in the U.S. He mentioned a specific individual, Abraham Elf, who arrived in the United States way back in 1924.
1924. Wow, that's much earlier than I would have guessed for Eritrean migration to the U.S., starting in any significant way.
It surprised me, too. And Issayas Tesfamariam actually connected recently with Abraham Elf's son, who's now 80 years old. This connection helped uncover documents about Abraham's life during Italian colonization in Eritrea. It's this amazing personal story that also illuminates the broader evolving patterns of migration that eventually built the Eritrean community in the U.S.
A century of history right there in one family's story.
Exactly. And even add a little detail, Abraham Elf's son mentioned two other Eritreans arriving around the same time, 1924, but their records are much harder to find. It's just a reminder of how diaspora histories can be fragmented, how much can be lost if it's not actively documented.
So this long history of migration, of community building over decades, forms the foundation for today's public diplomacy efforts. What's the main goal of the MPDG now?
The primary goal is very clear: to actively reshape perceptions of Eritrea and its people. The very phrasing suggests they feel current perceptions, maybe particularly in the U.S. where the MPDG is based, are often negative, inaccurate, or just incomplete.
And their approach is different from, say, government diplomacy.
Yes, very much so. Traditional diplomacy is government to government. The NPDG focuses on public diplomacy engaging directly with the broader public. Their aim is to improve understanding of Eritrean communities, their history, their culture, their values. How? By proactively sharing their own educational and cultural narratives. The goal is explicitly to foster a more positive image, to counter stereotypes or misinformation they see out there.
He also connected these current efforts back to Eritrea's struggle for independence.
He did. He pointed out that during the long independence struggle, many Eritrean groups in the diaspora were heavily involved in public diplomacy, raising awareness, advocating for the cause, sharing information. That history of activism, of telling their story for a political purpose, is a key foundation.
Okay.
Today, they build on that legacy, but the focus has shifted slightly. Now, culture is really the cornerstone of their narrative. It's about showcasing the richness, the depth, the resilience embedded in Eritrean culture as the primary way to foster understanding and connection.
And underlying all this, there seems to be a fundamental principle about controlling their own story.
Absolutely. He stated it very directly, and it's a sentiment you hear from many diaspora communities. Owning our story is vital. If we don't, others may misrepresent us. That's the core driver for the NPDG. It's about agency. It's about taking control of their own narrative in a world where outside media or other sources might present a skewed, incomplete, or overly negative picture.
So the NPDG sees its role as sharing their collective memory.
Precisely. Using that shared history, that collective memory, as a platform to tell their story past, present, future on their own terms. It's a direct response to feeling misrepresented or misunderstood.
So with that mission, what has the NPDG actually done? What are some of their specific initiatives to correct misconceptions and share this story?
They've been quite active since they launched. Interestingly, a big focus is what you might call internal public diplomacy, sharing the story and values with the next generation, the children and grandchildren of immigrants born and raised outside Eritrea.
Keeping the heritage alive within the diaspora.
Exactly. It's about ensuring younger generations connect with their roots, understand their family histories, the history of Eritrea itself. It's cultural preservation as much as it is external public diplomacy.
And what about their outward-facing projects? Any specific examples?
Yes, several key ones. He highlighted the Eritrean American Harmony magazine. It started in 2022. It's quarterly, online. And it's not just a basic newsletter. It's a proper magazine with articles on history, culture, community achievements, interviews, analysis.
And is it reaching people?
Apparently so. He mentioned they've already published 12 issues, and it's being accessed online in about 38 countries. That's pretty impressive reach for a volunteer-run community publication.
38 countries. Wow. What else are they doing?
They also have a regular quarterly newsletter just to keep members and supporters updated. And crucially, recognizing how important online presence is today, they made building a strong, professional website a top priority right from the start.
A central hub online.
Yeah, it supports all their other work, hosts the magazine, shares news, offers resources, information about the group itself.
You mentioned youth empowerment being central to their mission. How are they bringing young people into this?
This seems really key for their long-term vision. They're actively engaging young Eritrean American professionals and students, particularly those interested in technology and public diplomacy. They see this generation as essential for building a modern platform that reflects the community's diversity and energy.
Are they doing this systematically?
It sounds like it. Issayas Tesfamariam mentioned a specific detail. They surveyed over 400 young professionals in the diaspora. That suggests they're taking a structured approach, trying to understand what skills are out there, how younger people want to contribute, and building a real network. It's about empowering them to be leaders in telling the story.
And part of telling that story involves pushing back against negative media portrayals.
Absolutely, that's a critical piece. Directly addressing what they see as negative or inaccurate coverage of Eritrea and Eritreans, especially in the U.S. media, which obviously has a huge influence on public opinion.
How do they do that? Just writing letters to the editor?
They go way beyond that. They've actually established their own media platform, also under the Harmony name. This includes publishing, like the magazine, but also music production and film.
Their own media platform. Music and film, too. That's ambitious. Why take that step?
It's a very strategic move. By having their own platform, they gain much greater control over the narrative. They can produce and distribute content that tells their story authentically, from their perspective, reflecting their own voices. They aren't reliant on external media outlets who might have biases, limited understanding, or only focus on negative aspects.
So they can directly counter misrepresentations with their own positive or more nuanced content.
Exactly. They can create documentaries, release music, publish articles that showcase the full spectrum, the history, the culture, the resilience, the achievements, not just the challenges. It's a proactive strategy to own the narrative.
This all sounds like a tremendous amount of work. The magazine, the website, the media platform, how is it all funded?
He was clear that these initiatives are largely volunteer-driven. That really underscores the dedication. People are contributing their time, their skills, probably even their own money, because they believe this work is crucial. It's not coming from big grants. It's powered by community commitment.
That's real dedication.
And he stressed their belief that this work needs to be ongoing, a continuous effort to build understanding, not just reacting when something negative happens. It's about proactively shaping the narrative over the long term.
Building something sustainable, not just playing defense. What about the future? What's the vision for the NPDG moving forward?
They have ambitious goals focused on making this sustainable and more inclusive. They want to institutionalize their efforts, make them more permanent, maybe find more stable resources so it's less reliant on individuals burning out. And they want to bring even more young people into active roles, distributing responsibilities based on people's passions and skills to build a stronger, multi-generational foundation.
And there is a bigger vision, too, connecting back to that idea of collective memory.
Yes, a really powerful one. He described a hope to create a single, comprehensive online platform that would serve as a collective memory for all Eritreans, everywhere. And he explicitly said the vision is to invite everyone, historians, artists, ordinary people from the diaspora, maybe even from Eritrea itself, to contribute their stories, their documents, their memories to this shared space.
Wow, a living digital archive built by the community, for the community. That could be incredibly powerful for identity and connection.
It really could. Imagine a single online place holding historical accounts, cultural traditions, personal testimonies, family photos, community records, all curated and shared by Eritreans themselves. It's a vision for preserving history, bridging the gaps between dispersed communities and ensuring the complex, multifaceted story is told from the inside out, accessible for generations to come, building that unified narrative from countless individual threads.
So ultimately, the NPDG's role, as he sees it, is about harnessing all this talent and energy within the Eritrean American community to make sure their voices are heard, their stories understood on their own terms.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming the narrative, strengthening community bonds across time and space, and projecting an image based on their authentic history, culture, and contributions, not just one defined by external crises or historical debates alone.
Wow. Okay, what a journey we've taken. From the literal digging at Adulis, potentially rewriting ancient timelines and revealing deep roots of independent urbanism.
Right, through the really stark and challenging analysis of modern migration by Daniel Sillas, alleging systemic exploitation within the migration business.
To the proactive, culture-focused work of the MPDG, using media and community building to shape their own narrative, reaching back to migration stories from a century ago. We've seen the Eritrean story explored and contested from so many different angles.
It really shows how dynamic history and identity are, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not static. It's grounded in this deep, complex past that's still being uncovered. It's profoundly shaped by tough, present-day realities like migration and the struggle for fair representation. And is being actively constructed for the future through deliberate efforts like public diplomacy and cultural preservation.
So what does this all mean for you, listening in? We've gone from archaeological discoveries challenging historical timelines at Adulis, showing an independent, ancient, urban past,
Through Daniel Sillas's critical look at the migration business and the difficult realities that entails.
to MPDG's efforts to shape perception, build community, and reclaim the narrative through culture and media.
It's clear, isn't it, that understanding a place, a people, means looking at all these layers together.
Yeah.
The deep past gives context, roots. The challenging present tests resilience. And the efforts to build the future narrative show agency, hope, determination.
These sources, together, give you this unique, multidimensional view of the Eritrean experience. You see a community deeply tied to its history, grappling with complex modern issues, and actively working to define itself for the world.
Right. These aren't just separate stories, they're interconnected.
And here's something to really chew on. Consider this. How does knowing about that deep history of Adulis, its apparent independence, its resilience, its vast global connections, going back further than we thought, how might that resonate with the identity and resilience of Eritreans today?
That's a great question.
Especially maybe for those in the diaspora who are engaged in this very modern work of shaping their image, telling their story against things like the migration business or negative media. Does that ancient past, that knowledge of self-directed success and connection, does it inform or strengthen the contemporary struggle for self-definition?
It makes you wonder about the threads connecting that ancient confidence to modern resilience.
Exactly. What stands out to you from hearing these different perspectives laid side by side? The ancient port, the modern challenges, the narrative building. How do they speak to each other in your mind?
They're not just isolated incidents in time. They feel like parts of a much larger ongoing narrative about origin, connection, adversity, resilience, and that fundamental human drive to shape your own story and find your place in the world, whether that world was the ancient Red Sea or today's global diaspora.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.